This is log number 8. I'm recording on a Friday after the work week, and this week has been, I suppose, the best week in terms of what it yielded for me, as it yielded a big lesson and something that I want to touch upon in expressing how much an actual experience can shape up the whole story or the whole direction of things. Uh, let's take it from the beginning. From with my previous vlog, I aimed this week to finish the previous design around Tuesday, and then Wednesday forward begin the second design, and pretty much work on it for the next week or so. So as I did, on Monday I added some more shadows and light, playing around with some values of the drawing. And on Tuesday, what it had to be my last day on the design, I I was looking at the face and I wanted to sort of adjust some things, maybe slant the eye a little bit more, very mundane things. And I began sort of mending it. I erased it and started making new lines. Um, and at some point, the paper started sort of giving off. So the left eye, as I was sort of drawing on it, my mechanical pencil sort of scraped it without without me realizing it. And when I was sort of erasing, I was erasing in circular motions, trying to add some lights, and the paper started tearing. Now this paper that I'm using is quite of a thick paper, and it didn't tear so that you could see the other side, but it teared some of the first few layers of the paper. And what that resulted was that if I were to make another line or make another sort of design in terms of different angle of the eye or any of that sort, the graphite will take on the gradients of the gap and it will emphasize the wrong sort of parts and it wouldn't look right. So I spent Tuesday trying to mending that. It was a thing I worked the most on Tuesday. I was frantically on top of it, trying to make it right. In the end, around it was 10 p.m. The paper tear even more. Sort of like the eye and nose sort of section became completely unworkable, and I began sort of feeling disappointed. So I began sort of thinking about solutions for this because I had a design that was ready to finish. I spent probably around 100 hours or around there. And the face, which in this design was the pinnacle of one of the elements that that is going to stand out, as many of the statues of the other ones are a bit torn down, they're sort of weathered, damaged, but this particular one is more intact and it has like the face, the gaze, the way that works with the theme. It's very important. So I began sort of thinking solutions, like what should I do? In painting, sort of traditional fashion, you would sort of paint on top of it, as in uh, paint a color, let's say a white shade, all the face, and then start over again, which I did. I said to myself, well, I have a gap, and if I add painting, maybe that will introduce some of the layering. So I had sort of like a white titanium paint on top of the face just to cover everything, just so I can have an even value, the even value of the ratio of the paper, so I can work on it and maybe I can make lines that I want. So I did. That was around 11 p.m. at night, and I started drawing on it, and I realized that I couldn't. Um, Given that I'm using a lot of blending techniques with graphite, I didn't realize that when I was putting acrylics on the face, I couldn't really blend. It was just, imagine just a scratchy line without really any value of shadows and light. It's just like a, let's say, a line work, which just emphasizes just where the line would begin and end. So at that point, I began sort of feeling like despair started kicking in, I would say. So I started scraping off the paint. The face at this point had like a huge sort of gap of paper and like the borders of the face, the hair, and the actual eyes and nose became completely sort of etched. So uh, at that time, I said, you know what, I am done for the day. I couldn't stop thinking about it throughout sort of like the whole situation. I became very obsessed and thoughts of sort of all this time that I've spent is going to be wasted. What should I do now? Should I start it again? Um, so I went to bed that night around 12 p.m., feeling quite disappointed at myself because I should have known like this could have happened. It happened in my sort of mock-up run, but the paper was much weaker, and I tried to work around with having sort of fragmented sort of eyes and nose, and that would have been it. And I tried doing it this time, but I just couldn't get off the feeling that the face had to be the way that I wanted it to be because it was an important factor. And if I were to break this, then like the whole point of this drawing of this particular design is ruined. So I went to sleep. I was tossing and turning all the time, trying to think of ways. Oh yeah, I was thinking of reevaluating sort of the situation. Maybe what I was doing wasn't working out. Maybe the designs needed to be changed, or the amount of work that I was working maybe wasn't. It was too much, and the designated detail that I wanted was just a lot. And I had thoughts of sort of maybe scraping off this idea of the statues, these particular ones. But peculiarly enough, I didn't have any thoughts of giving up or saying like, this is not working out. Let's not do this ever again. Which was peculiar as I was thinking, when you're thinking about thoughts, you sometimes think of them as a third person thing saying, hey, I'm thinking this thing right now. And I was peculiar enough, um, perplexed to think that I wasn't considering giving up or saying like, oh, maybe this Stonemason is not gonna happen, like this story, or maybe a different direction of like maybe it's just gonna be a written story, like things like that. Because I was always stretching myself with all these different fronts of mediums, right? Like the writing part, the poem, the design, the drawings, all of these need to be done. And maybe I said to myself, maybe I'm asking too much for myself, and that's how the day ended. Wednesday came. On Wednesday, I was supposed to go to the doctor and take off my stitches for my operation, so I knew that I wasn't gonna be able to work. But on 4 a.m. on that day, I woke up quite sort of unnaturally because I don't really wake up around that hour, except if I need to use the restroom. So I woke up around that hour, and I began thinking about my problem again. Right, I thought it was a bad dream for a second, which was peculiar enough. Um, and I started thinking. Right, I said to myself, okay, so I have this issue, and before I slept, I thought it was like I wasted my time. Right, like I wasted all those hours, and now I have an unworkable sort of situation. But then I started thinking it in a different perspective and said to myself, if it's not that I've wasted my time, I've learned a lot from this, and it's not the first time that I'm dealing with, or I'm going to deal with an unfortunate event, be it in art or in life or in any part of the situation. And I said, how would I face that if it wasn't an artistic problem and it was sort of like any relationship issue or any type of relationship with a loved one or a friend or anything that is deemed as a problem in life? How would I deal with this? And I started sort of thinking about it in a bit more spherical, a bit more generalized, and I started sort of taking the facts, and the facts were that I've had a design that used a lot of time, had an incredible amount of detail, and one thing was missing, and it was the face. And I had an option of maybe changing the whole face if I'm gonna do it again, like from scratch, or maybe upping the scales of the drawing so I can work in more detail without having to sort of like make it microscopic, because having a bigger scale of a paper allows for much more details, a lot easier. The eyes wouldn't be like zero point 0.5 centimeters, and it will be like something like 3 centimeters, which 3 centimeters is quite big. You can just add so many layers of shadows, the iris, the everything, right? So I had that idea, but then I thought to myself, how do I make my compositions, right? I collage. I take things that from references, and I make them into a sort of like a monstrosity, and then I begin changing values, changing noses, eyes, expressions, gestures, everything. So I said to myself, why don't I do it here the same? Why don't I take another paper, redo just the face, and cut it and stick it on top of the design? So imagine the design as it were with the cutout of the actual face being stuck on top. And in addition, I could add it into the story in terms of as a, let's say, he's a stonemason, right? Like behind sort of the years that passed, he could have just easily struggled with this, right? And easily changed or completely altered the face of the statue. So sort of having a line around the neck would make sense. Sort of like when you're just switching sort of faces. Very unorthodox and very sort of tempered with, but the state of mind that he's in, it could be possible. So thus that morning I woke up around 5. I already had my measurements from when I did the face before, and I don't usually make the same things again. Like there's a rule in my head that I would never make the same design again, which that's why I was like, should I make the whole design again? Which was a very peculiar thing for me to say because I really wanted this design. So I sat down, I started designing the face again. I made the outline, I made the mouth, the nose, and then I had to go to the doctors. I went to the doctors, I did all that, everything's great. Nothing to worry about, everything is healing great. And I came back and I said, I need to do this. So I did the eyes. It looked nice. It was sort of like the base level of what it could be. And then I cut it out. I used this glue that is able to sort of like be taking off and then stuck back on. Because I found the idea of, let's say if someone owns this drawing down the line, it would be interesting for them to have like this interchangeable sort of like the face below, which is sort of like this fractured, denty sort of mess of a face, which it is very possible in a statue. And on top of it, this new and very, very detailed face that came on top. And I did, and I stuck it on top, and I started shading around it, and the actual effect that I saw was like this three-dimensional popping out of the paper type of face that around it had like this beautiful shadow that made everything work, and it made everything sort of even more interesting to the eye. And given that the face was one of the elements in this design that were really the standpoint, I felt that this is beautiful. Obviously, the face wasn't similar to the previous one. Yes, the same gesture and expression and sort of vibe, but the actual face execution wise was much different, and I actually liked it a lot more. And that was it. A lesson learned that in any point of any artistic journey, there is always a struggle and always a mishap. That's what usually happens when you spend a lot of time in a design. Of course, attachment will happen, and I was attached to it. That's why I was like, all these hours that I spent are wasted. But then after I slept on it and I started thinking in a different angle, in a different perspective, that time wasn't actually wasted. I just, it happens. It really does, and in any part of my life, in any other problems, I would have found a solution that maybe it is unorthodox, and maybe it's not ideal, but it makes for an interesting design and an interesting history about something. And I wanted to voice this out in the logs because I think having the struggle of failing or having any sort of advertising in drawing or in any part of art is part of it, and having bad days or days that you think that this is pointless are gonna happen. And I think many of us who are putting themselves out there in terms of dedicating lots of time in this particular thing, in the end it becomes this struggle of you don't want to ruin it, you don't want to do anything that will jeopardize your time spent on it. But in that moment you realize that if you continue with that thought process, your fearfulness of not being able to explore it further, you're risking the chance of you not learning from it and just staying with whatever it's safe, which was one of the initial ideas of me not continuing doing another 10 set piece of paintings again, because I already done it before. It doesn't mean that I'm not gonna do it again, but especially for my next theme, which is this one, I wasn't gonna do the same medium because I wanted to learn things. I wanted to push myself and really rewrite, or better yet, add on top of what I already knew, and really embrace myself in the unknown. And of course, yes, I knew this medium graphite is. I've been using it all this time, but I've never really executed a piece in its final forms just using this medium. It was always sort of line work and then everything, just and some basic shadows, so I know where light and shadow comes. Um, so that was an achievement for me, and an example how I'm gonna be faced with a lot of this moving forward, and thinking outside of the box, at least at my boxed mind, is warranted for me to introduce this execution and the level of execution that I want from this. And I realized that it made the whole story and the whole concept of like this person who lived so long, and we're seeing his statues after so many years ago, and we see them in front of us towards the end of his life. How would time affect them? And they wouldn't look as pretty as the first day that he did it. And I mean, in my experience, when I'm seeing my paintings after years and years, and especially because you can't really hide them when they're in a room, right? And especially if it's, imagine a statue, you have like a storage, and you just at some point you will come across them, and seeing them all the time does something to you, especially in me, and I would imagine someone who's going through a lot in their life, for in this example being the stonemason, and having all these experiences, and having to seclude himself for so many years, and nothing but his paintings, and statues, and writing, and his mind just keep him company. It would severely have an effect on him. So thus, moments like this, the breaking, and adding, and taking away, and really testing the boundaries of how something should look, is something that I'm going to be dabbling even more in this story. Alongside that, besides sort of this lesson that I've learned, um, I finished the design today. On Thursday, I took a break. I think it was needed, after so many hours spent, on Tuesday. On Wednesday, when I was doing the face, it took me around like an hour or two collectively, from the whole day, because it was just the phase that I was doing. And as soon as I've seen it work, I was extremely happy with myself and my direction of how I took things. That I said, on Thursday I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just gonna enjoy this feeling, and on Friday I'm gonna finish it, no matter what. And today I did that. I finished the design. I realized that I could have been working on it for another 2, 3 weeks, or forever in that instance. It's one of those things again that I faced in my painting time, that something can be labeled finished whenever you decide, but it could be endless at the same time. So I didn't want to fall into that trap, and I said, okay, I'm gonna spend all these 3 hours, 3, 4 hours, whatever, and whatever I'm able to achieve in those 3, 4 hours, I'm gonna close it at that, because I have so many other designs that I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna be obviously getting better at each and every one of them. And if I learn something new from them, I can come back and add it here. Given that graphite is a lot easier to reintroduce things rather than painting, because you have to go back and take the colors out, pick the specific colors. It's much more of a hassle, and here it's a lot easier. So I concluded it, and I really wanted to touch upon this lesson that I've learned. And I know that it's very unorthodox on how I'm sort of adding deadlines, and adding sort of like, oh, this week I'm gonna do this, and then it turns out it doesn't happen. And I think if anyone is listening, and how anything goes in terms of planning, your plans will never go as planned. And I've learned that quite a lot of times, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't go in with a plan. And that's what I keep telling myself, having an idea of, maybe if I'm able to do this the next week, it's gonna be great. And if it happens, which is rarely happens, um, it wouldn't sort of like finish, or be developed as much as you hoped, because every design is different. And especially now that every design was designed to have a very specific difficulty that is very unique from the other ones, is something that I'm sort of keeping myself intact in my mind, of saying like, this is going to happen in more and more, and the frequent amount of revisiting, or having to extend things. But that's the conclusion of this week. This week has been very fascinating, and I'm quite proud of myself for the way that I handled this experience. It would have been easy for me to say I'm done, or just completely tore it apart and be like, I don't care. I'm not gonna bother with this, or anything negative. But I surprisingly just stuck with it, which I found very, very peculiar. Even now that I'm thinking about, like, how did I do that? Because I have a lot of things to learn about myself. But regardless, the next week coming, which is gonna be the week that this vlog will be released, I'm gonna start off on the new design. the quote unquote boy design of the statues. I'm gonna start doing the measurements. It's probably gonna take me some time, and I'll see how that will go. But towards the end of that week, I'm gonna do something special for you guys because the next time a log will come out, log number 9 will be on the 25th of December. And 25th of December was my initial sort of release day for Arc 1, back when I didn't know how the drawing section and how detailed I want everything to be. So on that day, I decided to have something special for you, and I wanted to introduce you guys to a visual sort of workaround on how things will be interactable. So obviously, I don't have like the drawings to execute it, or I do have some, but I don't want to spoil it for you. So I'm gonna use some dummy drawings, or maybe perhaps a very rough compositional of something random, just to show you how on the website how it could be interactable. So I'm gonna be sharing my screen, and I'm gonna show you sort of like this picture, and I'm gonna be able to sort of like say, so you're gonna go through it in maybe this way, and you can click this, and how everything sort of will pop out and have an interaction, and sort of show you the idea that I've been talking about all this time. I think that will be nice as a placeholder of what could happen. Obviously, the designs and the implementation of it might change, but the concept of it it is what it's going to happen, and especially how you will sort of interact with it. So I will do that for you, and hopefully that will be a nice sort of idea of how you would be able to see this arc. Not too long now. It's not like I have lots of designs. I do have like 8 more designs to do, 5 more of this type of designs that I'm doing, and 3 bigger ones and the major designs, which I don't know how long that would take. So yeah, not every arc will have the same sort of logic as well. So I keep telling myself, well, maybe this arc is having all these designs because it's warranted, right? But like the next arc, which I know how it's gonna go, it's more in his mind, which is very my thing, to always introduce the reality and then how it's perceived in the person's mind, especially in flow. And in the middle point, it was the mind, which was the title of the character's sort of inner understanding of things. And well, uncharacteristically, where I'm doing it here as well. So in Arc 2, it's gonna be that different, of course, but like it's gonna be the development on how his ideas are sort of taking shape. So that will be probably different the way that it's going to be executed. And then Arc 3, it's much more specific, but have a lot more additional sort of interactable things that not really are shown in the bigger compositions, but are more sort of like introduced as a side, which is they're quite easy to make. So yeah, I hope this log wasn't too confusing, and maybe this experience that I had, this hiccup, was able to bear some light on how uncontrollable things are when you're dealing with the unknown in terms of any artistic endeavor. So yeah, this was my experience this week, and I hope next week coming with the new design and the interesting log that is gonna have the visual way of interacting with the story will be of interest.